in preparation for the chapter tonight. If you did, you may have really missed the whole lesson of what Mr. Lewis is saying. Again, he takes the blandly mundane and tries to draw a rather interesting spiritual lesson from it. The subject is gluttony. Page 76, C.S. Lewis, the Screwtape Letters, chapter 17. The subject is gluttony. And I think he's going to make a point, if you haven't had time to read the chapter, in a direction that's not entirely fitting with perhaps the popular understanding of gluttony, although that subject does come in to play somewhat at the end of the chapter. But then I think that Mr. Lewis also has something else in mind, or let's hope that he does. I do, even if he didn't intend for it to be this way. Something else a little more spiritual and perhaps a little deeper in mind that's behind the blandly mundane subject of gluttony. And just what that is, we shall see momentarily. My dear Wormwood, the contemptuous way in which you spoke of gluttony as a means of catching souls in your last letter shows only your ignorance. He is saying that Wormwood doesn't realize the spark plug potential, the dynamite potential behind gluttony as a way to ensnare or capture souls. One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on that subject, so that by now you will hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe. Let's stop right there for a moment before we go on. It's a subject that's rather gluttony in general. It's rather interesting to me. I think it's rather obvious that I don't have a problem in that area, so it's not that I have inside information on the subject or something I've greatly struggled with, but something that seems to be a problem with a number of people, and so it's one I've taken a lot of interest in. And so when you take interest in something, you generally study it, you research it. So a lot of what I know about the subject maybe we'll save for when we get to that in Christian ethics, and we talk about responsibilities that we have physically into our own body, because there are all the ins and outs and positives and negatives and pluses and minuses and pros and cons and arguments that people have about the whole subject. It is mentioned in Scripture in Deuteronomy 21 and verse 20. The KJV has the term glutton. In Proverbs 23:21, a glutton and one who drinks too much wine is mentioned as an evil. It's mentioned as a vice, a sin, a curse, unrighteousness, unholiness, something that should be avoided by the man who is wise. But it's not just a subject that can be so easily reduced as to say, well, measure the intake of your food, in pounds or liters or whatever. There's a lot behind that. I mean, why does God say, what would be wrong with eating too much, I wonder? I wonder what would be wrong with that. Are we not somehow being Gnostic dualists again here? By saying now, if it's invisible, if it's spirit, it's good. If it's matter, if it's something fleshly, then it's got to be evil. The New Testament does address the issue, although the term glutton for a sin for a Christian is not found over there, but it's found under, the idea is found under other theology and other terminology. He says that this is one of the great achievements they've accomplished in the last 100 years, is kind of striking this out of people's thoughts, striking it out of sermon material, lecture material. In other words, I guess what he means is people are more gluttonous today than they were in the past. Well, I'm sure that's debatable, but we find different categories, I think, of people. We certainly are in a health trend in the United States today, but a health trend of cycling and jogging. I mean, just a few years ago, you would never find all these nuts out beside the road and all inclement weather and all times of the day and night, and you drive by them and you look at them and you say, my, if that's having fun, or that means, it's worth it, I'm not going to do it. You look and their chins dragging on the ground, they just dread being out there. A few years ago, you wouldn't see that. You drive around and people would be maybe walking somewhere, but not running themselves into the ground, killing themselves. And some people literally, they've got a technical name, you won't get into that, but it goes so far as to actually kill them, starving themselves to death and so forth. But then again, we're in a fitness and health trend in the United States, but it's not rubbing off on a large percentage of our population, though. So I think in every day, and especially in our day, and that's when we live, so we're not too concerned about other days or times, and every day you're going to find a division there. And of course people want to get into the fact, well, it's not fair, the other people weren't born with the same metabolism rate that I have, it's just I eat like a bear and seem to store it like a bear when he hibernates, and other people just eat and it drops through the bottom of their shoes or something. And so how could God, hold me, accountable for this and not someone else? Look at them, they eat 5 times as much as I do, and they weigh 1/4 as much as I do. And so that doesn't seem to be fair. Well, he's not getting into that, so let's don't. One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on the subject, so that by now you'll hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe. Now he's going to take a twist here, though. This has largely been affected by concentrating all our efforts on gluttony of delicacy and not gluttony of excess. The word gluttony comes from a Latin word that means your throat, or means to swallow. It does really talk about eating and eating too much. But you can also speak of someone as he's a glutton for punishment. They just seem to always be there, always ready for it, or they have an extreme tolerance for it, or however you'd want to define that. There are other ways you could use the term gluttony. So not gluttony of excess, he says, but gluttony of delicacy. So you're safe for a few moments. We won't be talking about excess until a little bit later. Your patient's mother. Remember, he has a patient, and Glubos, I think, is a demon that's supposed to be working on the mother, and Wormwood's working on the son. Your patient's mother, as I learned from the dossier, and you might have learned from Glubos, is a good example. She would be astonished, one day I hope she will be, to learn that her whole life is enslaved to this kind of sensuality, which is quite concealed from her by the fact that the quantities involved are small. So we're not talking about what we normally think of with gluttony. As he described earlier, or as he named earlier, gluttony of excess. The quantities are small. He says, however, we still have her in this kind of sensuality, this kind of gluttony, which she named earlier as a gluttony of delicacy. Now you see, if you haven't seen people where this is true, and perhaps you know one personally, perhaps you are one where this is true. Then there are a lot of things that you could build from this, a lot of things that could be said from this that I think would maybe be taking it a little too far, and I hope I can correct all of that or clarify all of that later. But what do quantities matter, provided we can use a human belly and palate? Paul speaks of people who are serving their own bellies over in Romans 16 and Philippians 3. He's probably using a metaphor there, not just talking about gluttons, or maybe not talking about gluttons, period, leaving out the word just. But people that are self-centered, people that are concerned about their own interests. And what interest do any of us have any more than our own belly? Making sure it stays full so we don't have headaches and we can get out of bed in the morning and can lift a 2x4 more than 3 inches off the ground, etc., etc. What do quantities matter, provided we can use a human belly and palate to produce querulousness, impatience, uncharitableness, and self-concern? In other words, as long as we produce the evils and the vices that we desire, what difference does it make what type of gluttony we're using as an agent? The gluttony of excess might produce these, but then it, again, might not. He's saying the gluttony of delicacy certainly will. Glubos has this old woman well in hand. She is a positive terror to hostesses and servants. In other words, anyone on whom she ever depends for her food to bring her something, either the hostess, she goes and she's under them, or a servant, she's over the servant, whoever has to bring her food. He said she's a positive terror to such people. Now, I have seen people like this. I don't know a lot of people that would fit the bill, but again, thanks to television or reading material, you're probably familiar with this general overall syndrome here. She is always turning what has been offered her, turning from what has been offered her, to say with a demure little sigh and smile, "Oh, please, please, all I want is a cup of tea, weak but not too weak, and the teeniest, weeniest bit of really crisp toast." You see? I ask you, you see? Do you understand what he's criticizing, what he's saying here? Well, what we have here is what might be somewhat generally and improperly termed a perfectionist. He's talking about gluttony, but gluttony of delicacy here. Here he says we have a woman who is a glutton. She is a glutton, but she's a glutton for self-interest. She's not a glutton to eat a whole lot of food. She's a glutton as to how the food is fixed, how it's given to her, how warm, how cold, how long, how short, how thick, how thin, how spicy, how salty, how whatever. She's a glutton for self-interest. She goes overboard with self. She has no self-control. She's not thoughtful. She's not reasonable. She's not agreeable. She's not pleasant. She's a nasty old lady, in other words. Very difficult to get along with. All the nasty terms and vices you could ascribe to her would probably be appropriate. And it's not Lewis's mother, but it is a woman that has lived with him for many, many years. He knows this woman very well, and he is writing under the cover of pseudonymity, but we all know who and what he has reference to. She's always turning from what has been offered her to say with a demure little sigh and smile. I mean, she wants to appear polite and appear as though she's doing someone else a favor, as though she's rendering a service to someone else, and say, "Oh, I don't really want much. I don't really need anything. All," notice he has that word italicized, "all I want is a cup of tea." So we think, "Oh, this is great. It's so easy to serve someone." Wait a minute. She's got something specific about this tea, though. It's not just, "I'm just here, your humble, lowly handmaiden. Yea, bring me a scrap of bread, and I shall be satisfied." It's not that type of person. It's not that type of, "Oh, please, please, all I want is a cup of tea, weak." All right, we'll go fix some weak tea, but not too weak. Well, what do you mean by not too weak? In other words, it's got to be exactly right. In other words, it has to be precisely right here. Weak, but not too weak. What he's going to say is this will be the person who's a greater glutton, not really about food, but when it comes to food, their gluttony manifests itself because they're glutton in the area of self-control or of agreeableness. And the teeniest, weeniest bit, that's not the important phrase, of really crisp toast. And she didn't ask for bread or toast or a small piece of toast or a medium piece. The teeniest, weeniest bit of really crisp toast. Of really crisp toast. She has to have it a certain way. You see? Now I hope you can answer the question. Yes, we do. Because what she wants is smaller and less costly than what has been set before her, she never recognizes as gluttony her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. There's what he's talking about. A glutton of self-control. She thinks because what she wants is less and less expensive, then somehow that makes her a saint in the roll call of the Christian church or something. Because I want something less. I don't want to cause any trouble. I don't want a big loaf of bread or a big this or a big that. It's not quantity, in other words. It's delicacy. It's the quality of it. Not quantity here, but delicacy. She never recognizes as gluttony her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. Now, whether you do that in food, we all have done that in some aspect of our life. We kind of use as a pretense there, well, I don't want to cause you much trouble. It's just this little thing or that little thing that I need or that I want. But we don't recognize that we're being so precise and so non-agreeable and so troublesome and so narrow and so, well, the best term I can think of is a non-pleasant person. You know, we're easily upset. It's easy to quarrel. We don't recognize that because we're not asking for something big, we're still asking for something very, very big. It's not in quantity, but it's in all of the trouble that it takes. Her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. At the very moment of indulging her appetite, she believes that she is practicing temperance because she's not eating a lot. In a crowded restaurant, she gives a little scream at the plate, which some overworked, notice how he's bearing down with the adjectives here, waitress, to really paint the picture here, hair all just every which way, grease on the tip of her nose, has set before her and says, "Oh, that's far, far too much. Take it away and bring me about a quarter of it." Well, a quarter, what are we going to do? Get some postage scales out here and go back and weigh this thing? Now, 1/4, 25%. She probably meant exactly that, 25%. If challenged, someone says, "Well, just go ahead and eat what you want and just leave the rest of it there. It won't make any difference." If challenged, she would say that she's doing this to avoid waste. And you see, what he's saying is that if that is why you're doing it, that's probably okay. But if that is why you're doing it, you would never need to ask the waitress to come back and exchange anything. You just eat what you want and leave the rest there. He said, this woman is a pest. She annoys everyone around her. Nothing is right for her. Nothing is good enough for her. Those are difficult people to live around. Lewis has lived around her for about 2 decades, I think, when he sang this. Those are difficult people to live around. You cannot please them, no matter what you do. There's always something either done too much or something left undone. And they'll even get theological on you and call those sins of commission and omission there. Things are not perfect. Things are not as I would have them to be. If challenged, she would say, "Well, I don't want to waste anything, so will you please take it back?" But she's a little pest, a little ant, a little fly, a little mosquito here. She can't stand eating the quarter and just leaving the rest of it there. That's not going to bother anything except her, though. And so rather than allow something or have something bother her, she wants to bother everyone else around her. Now again, if it doesn't apply with food, for us it applies somewhere else. We don't want ourselves to be bothered, but we seem to think nothing of the issue of bothering or pestering someone else. In reality, she does it because the particular shade of delicacy to which we have enslaved her is offended by the sight of more food than she happens to want. The real value of the quiet, unobtrusive work which Glubos has been doing for years on this old woman can be gauged by the way in which her belly now dominates her whole life. The woman is in what may be called the all-I-want state of mind. All she wants, that's what she said earlier, all she wants is a cup of tea properly made, or an egg properly boiled, or a slice of bread properly toasted. I mean, we all have asked for toast and got bread, and asked for bread and got toast, and asked for an egg that has some consistency to it, and found it just spreading everywhere on the plate. Or asking for one that we could sop in, and the thing could be used as a softball. Tea properly made, egg properly boiled, slice of bread properly toasted. But she never finds any servant or any friend who can do these things properly, because her properly conceals an insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible palatable pleasures which she imagines she remembers from the past. A past described by her as the days when you could get good servants, but known to us as the days when her senses were more easily pleased, and she had pleasures of other kinds which made her less dependent on those at the table. She is an older woman at this time, by the way, and I think that sometimes is a trait of older people. What happens, but as part of the fall, some of their senses begin to degenerate, sometimes more quickly than others. And those locations on their tongue, there are only certain places on your tongue where you can taste sour tastes and sweet taste and salty taste. You got certain taste buds that recognize certain flavors and others don't, and those don't others. That's why your tongue is there. And that's why you put something in your mouth, and what do? You kind of roll it all around in there. Because if you don't know where the right place is for the right flavor, then it just goes down tasting like cardboard or a piece off a 2x4, maybe some grass out of the front yard. But you don't know where it is, so you just roll it around. What do they do when they put wine in their mouth? You know, the wine connoisseurs, they roll it all around. Get the full, rich, real flavor of it. What happens with older people? Well, he said, known to us the days gone by, when her senses were more easily pleased. Well, they might not be as easily pleased now. Surely you've heard of old people who get a little more determined about the way the food has to be. You know, what happened to this food? There's nothing happened. Same griddle, same pan, same woman cooking it, has been cooking it all these years. But you don't have the senses that you used to have. So what happened to salt on this? No salt on this. And so, boom, there comes the salt on it. The salt was already on it. Just they couldn't taste. Or what happened to this, or what happened to that? Of course, you could accuse the cook, and her senses are lessening too. And so is their eyesight. And so, you know, it's like people that swat for raisins, and they think it's a fly over there or something. Crushing raisins all over the counter, and it's really flies. Or they go after the flies, and it's really a raisin there. And so she puts what she thinks is enough, or she thinks that she did put on. Now, no cook has ever asked herself, did I put that ingredient in? I forgot now whether I did. And so what do? Well, it's 50-50. You just say, well, I'm going to chance it that I did. And let's hope that you chanced it right that time. But I'm sure you chance it sometimes, and no, you didn't put that ingredient in. And that's why it sinks instead of rises. Other times, I don't think I did, and you did. And you put double in then. Well, how much more that would happen to older people then? So earlier days for this woman may have been better days as far as her senses were concerned. And probably also she had pleasures of other kinds which made her less dependable on those at the table. Meanwhile, the daily disappointment of not having things done properly produces daily ill temper. Cooks give notice and friendships are cool. Lewis has had to battle with this morning after morning after morning. This is an old cranky, cantankerous woman that he's living with. No relation to her. Ought to just throw the old bag, the tramp out. But he's a Christian gentleman. Of course, you couldn't do something like that. And she doesn't have anywhere to go. I don't remember all the story, but as I say, I've read some of his biographies, autobiographies, so I know about the woman. But he's got to, see, he's the one who has to cook the food for them in the morning, and whenever he gets back from classes in the afternoon or the evening. And of course, he's writing autobiographically here. Nothing will please this old nag. If ever the enemy introduces into her mind, the enemy would be God, a faint suspicion that she is too interested in food, then Glubos counters it by suggesting to her that she doesn't mind what she eats herself, but does like to have things nice for her boy. In fact, of course, you know, C.S., you would like it this way. This is the way all rational human beings would like it this way. In fact, of course, her greed has been one of the chief sources of his domestic discomfort for many years. Now, Lewis either probably did a Hail Mary or something just about this time for the fact of grace on his life, or I'm sure he did something thinking that I'm writing about myself. Her greed has been one of the chief sources of his domestic discomfort for many years. Now, your patient, he's got to talk to Wormwood, of course, not Glubos. His is the woman. Now, your patient is his mother's son. I'm going to go in a little bit different tangent here, talking about the pride and the vanity of men. That's, I guess, again, easy to miss, like delicacy would be as you read along, unless you're thinking carefully. Maybe we need to just pause before we go any further, because I think he will get somewhat off the subject of delicacy. I suppose that it's just natural, and there's nothing wrong with it, to the human race that every single individual is just that when it comes to food, an individual. And you can hardly find two people who are absolutely identical when it comes to eating habits or when it comes to eating whatever. In other words, if you don't have any care whatsoever at all under the sun about the food that's been set before you, we've got one of two names for you, either a barbarian or a buzzard. Surely we all have a concern. I mean, you don't say, well, my steak, just do half of it rare, quarter of it burnt, quarter of it somewhere in between, and I'll just devour the whole thing. No, everyone has a preference. Everyone, hopefully they do, some preferences in some areas. If you don't, you are a barbarian or you're a vulture. But when it comes to the point that nothing is done properly, I mean, even water's not boiled properly. You didn't put a blowtorch under it and get it there quickly enough or whatever. Then I think that's precisely what he's talking about, and this is the type of woman here. Nothing is ever done properly. Here, then, is when we have a problem. Now, if you happen to be of the model that we would call a garbage disposal, well, that's the same as a barbarian or a buzzard. Well, then that's good. Not good for your stomach, probably, but it's good for whoever's having to cook your food, that's for sure. Those are the type of people that kneel down at the end of the table and the wife and the children tilt the other end. Oh, the food just goes off. Forks, spoons, plates, center flower arrangement. Well, you probably don't know me well enough, because there has been a silent revolution in my life over the years, to know that you probably can't think of anything that I wouldn't eat or that I don't like, if it's food. Now wait, hold it, let's qualify that. I do not eat bark off of trees and pine cones. But what you would consider food, you hardly know something that I wouldn't eat, that I probably wouldn't enjoy. But, there's certain things that I like made a certain way. The point is, let's hope if they're not made that way, oh, well, one of two things. Either you can just pass over the meal for that time of the day, or you can eat it and enjoy it. Pretend that you enjoy it. Well, that'd be dishonest. Enjoy it or don't enjoy it, and eat it nevertheless. There's what he's talking about here. A person who will not eat it, who will not enjoy it, who will not pretend, but he'll say, oh, I don't want very much. There's not a lot that I need. Just some toast. But here are the qualifications. Now, it's got to be so many square inches here. It's going to measure the bread. I want it to weigh a certain amount. And it's got to be cooked right. Of course, we see from her that she likes crisp, very crisp, really crisp toast. So let's go on to the next category. Now, your patient is his mother's son. While working your hardest, quite rightly, on other fronts, you must not neglect a little quiet infiltration in respect of gluttony. Now, being a male, he's different than his mother. He is not so likely to be caught by the all I want camouflage. You see a lot of women do that. All I want, they're just little mosquitoes as far as I'm concerned. Because men generally aren't like that. They just start gnawing down. Males are best turned into gluttons with the help of their vanity. They ought to be made to think themselves very knowing about food, to pique themselves on having found the only restaurant in the town where steaks are really properly cooked. Well, see, he's back to properly now. And so this is what the male, he said, will do. You know, he makes the rounds of town there, and, you know, he's knowledgeable in civic and community affairs, and that makes him knowledgeable about restaurants in the area. And he can tell you, the woman stays at home, he can tell you where food is cooked properly. I mean, this is the way that steak should be made, or this is the way seafood should be cooked, or this is the way good vegetables, when they're mixed together, should taste. So he said, let's build on his vanity. What is he still talking about? Should. Properly. It's not the teeny, weeny, little bit delicacy. Maybe big orangutan proportion here, but it's still properly. It has to be done right here. Now, I don't know much about Lewis's eating habits, but we could probably gain a lot from this chapter about his eating habits. He probably would eat tree bark. So he's irritated living around anyone else who won't eat the way he eats. And so what would his thought be? You should, properly. You should eat properly. And properly for him, just a little broader of a definition than for this poor mosquito with whom he lives. What begins as vanity can then be gradually turned into habit. But however you approach it, the great thing is to bring him into the state in which the denial of any one indulgence, it matters not which, from drinks to smokes, puts him out. You know, when someone says they're put out about something, puts him out. For then his charity, justice, and obedience are all at your mercy. He's after something more than just food, or properly cooked food here. It's that, well, as I started off the message saying, that here again he gives us the blandly mundane to draw something spiritual from it. And what's the book about? A senior devil instructing a junior devil in the art of effective Christian temptation. And how often that is what they will use. They don't give you an angel of light to cause you to stumble or to sin. It's generally nothing ever that great or significant or tremendous. It's generally something a lot smaller. And so maybe it's kind of run-of-the-mill stereotype now, but maybe it's rather common that we talk about people losing the victory over burnt toast. This woman would never lose the victory over that. She likes really crisp toast, of course. But over burnt toast. Why I think the mentality is you're thinking to yourself, there we go back to all I wanted. All I wanted was just a piece of bread. You can't even fix bread right. It's the all I want thing. All I wanted was just bread. I didn't ask for a 7-course meal, just bread. Toast it. I don't want to hold it at one end and it just drop, on the other end. I wanted to toast it. But I don't want to be able to skate on top of it either, though. Only somewhere in between. They just can't seem to get it right. But we're back to all I want syndrome. All I'm asking, I think that's probably what goes through our mind, any of us who have ever done that before. We're thinking, come on, it's just bread, eggs, just scramble them. I don't want you pouring it on my plate. I had a relative, well, it was my grandmother. We'd get scrambled eggs for breakfast at her house. She would pour it, you'd have to drink it down. As long as they're scrambled. As long as they're properly made. That's all I want. So food is one of those universal domestic problems. If you live out there in caveman's land, it's probably no problem to you. You just eat meat raw there. But for domesticated people, it's probably a chief domestic problem. Would you say that you wouldn't raise your hand if I asked, have you ever had a problem in your home regarding food, the cooking and eating of food? Most everyone looks like they've got their honest britches on tonight. Have you never had a problem about the way your wife cooks food? I guess it always ends up with the men, because generally the wives do the cooking, but they have to be either satisfied or dissatisfied with their own food as well. So there, take that for them. It's not just us, it's them as well. Never had a problem? Oh, I think we all have. So if you know that's an area of temptation, where a person ends up, losing their charity, justice, and obedience, well, then you would want to safeguard that area in your life then. And it's a very real area. Something about the way Lewis thinks seems to reduce things to their simplest formula here. Think, wow, I was looking for some great temptation. No, an angel of light or the devil or an arch-devil or something appearing to me and tempting me. It's generally nothing like that. It's generally the blandly mundane that serves as a potent force of temptation. Well, let's go on. Mere excess in food is much less valuable than delicacy. Oh, by the way, let me say this about Mr. Lewis. He was rather rotund himself. He's no thin, wiry soul. Why is he playing down this gluttony of excess here? See, we got to remember that about him. He had a large belt that went around a large stomach. I think that gluttony of excess is a very definite and real problem. But he tones that down here, though. So we can forgive him. He has a prejudice, a vested interest in that area. Mere excess in food is much less valuable than delicacy. Now he's going to talk a little about gluttony of excess. Its chief use is as a kind of artillery preparation for attacks on chastity. Now the next couple of chapters are going to be about love and sexual matters, so he's kind of building up to that. Its chief use, eating too much food, gluttony of excess, fat people. He said its chief use is a kind of artillery preparation for attacks on chastity. This paragraph's a little confusing. Some of it makes sense and some of it might be true on occasions with some people. On that, as on every other subject, keep your man in a condition of false spirituality, the one who's eating too much, the glutton of excess. Keep him in a condition of false spirituality. Never let him notice the medical aspect. In other words, never let him, get through. Well, let's go on. The next sentence will be his false spirituality. Keep him wondering what pride or lack of faith has delivered him into your hands. He'll be looking around, well, I wonder what I did wrong to make me eat too much, or I wonder what I did. People, what he's saying, what I think he means by that is people who are always kind of looking in those areas are people who never really conquer the problem. Because they never really say, no, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And so he chooses something that he would think would be the most shocking, most obvious way to avoid this. And he says, it's the medical question. It's unhealthy to be overweight. It's very hard on your body. It's hard on your heart. It's hard on your lungs. It's hard on your limbs. It's hard on your legs. It's hard on your back. It's hard on your posture. It's difficult on your body. So keep the obvious. He picked what he thought would be the most obvious area that should be, discussed or looked into right away, the medical side. Never let him notice the medical aspect. Keep him wondering false spirituality. What pride or lack of faith has delivered him into your hands when a simple inquiry into what he has been eating or drinking for the last 24 hours would show him whence your ammunition comes, and thus enable him by a very little abstinence to imperil your lines of communication. If he must think of the medical side of chastity, now he took a cue from medical. Now he's not so much talking just about food, but now about chastity. If he must think of the medical side of chastity, feed him the grand lie which we have made the English humans believe, that physical exercise in excess and consequent fatigue are specially favorable to this virtue. Now, let's stop there and I'll try to briefly explain what he's talking about. He's saying one grand lie that we fed to these English vermin and rodents is that a person can control their sexual desires by simply exercising a whole lot, being a real, athletic type person, and that will always be followed by a lot of fatigue, and so you'll, quote, never be in the mood, end of quote. And so somehow that'll keep you a chaste person. Now he's saying that's a grand lie that we fed them. People that involve themselves in physical exercise in excess of the consequent fatigue think that will safeguard them against sexual deviation. In other words, it will keep them living in a state of chastity. He said, well, how they can believe this in face of the notorious lustfulness of sailors and soldiers may well be asked. In other words, he gives a couple of examples of people who are always exercising and always tired, and he says, and they are notorious for being non-chaste. So how these English humans could ever believe that, he said, it's beside us, but nevertheless, it's good that they do. But we use the schoolmasters to put the story about, that physical exercise in excess and consequent fatigue would reduce sexual deviation. We use the schoolmasters to put the story about men who were really interested in chastity as an excuse for games, and therefore recommended games as an aid to chastity. But this whole business is too large to deal with at the tail end of a letter. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. Now, we're not going to go on tonight. I don't want to get into the next chapter. The next one bleeds right over into the next one. The next chapter ends, but more of this in his next letter. So you know that those two chapters then will go together, and they really tie into the tail end of chapter 17. Well, I don't want to pass over the subject of food too quickly, because we are in a Christian school here. We are here for instruction, and for not only for instruction, but for edification as well. And he's simply trying to help us avoid a very demonic pitfall in the domestic arrangement. And that is to allow something that's not properly done, food in this instance, in this case, to cause one to lose their charity, justice, and to become, therefore, disobedient in their life. But then you would, of course, most surely want to extend that to every area where something is not done, quote, properly, unquote. What really is Mr. Lewis talking about here? What is he really saying? What is his true topic? I think what he's after here is Christian contentment. Christian contentment. I think it's his true topic behind all of this. Or what we might call agreeableness. An agreeable person is one who's not so rigidly demanding. An agreeable person, I think, the dictionary would give a synonym for that as a pleasant person. An agreeable or a pleasant person. one who is able to live in the Philippians 4 state of contentment. I've learned that in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. So I think that I would then want to say some things in addition to what Lewis has covered here in chapter 17. I would never want, because I don't think this is healthy for the Christian at all, I would never want to illogically or unscripturally tone down the subject of exactness or preciseness. Notice that could be an inference from this chapter. Well, she shouldn't be wanting things so properly done, so she should just ask for bread or just toast or an egg and just be satisfied more or less with what is given to her. Well, in one sense that's true. In one sense that's what we're talking about as far as contentment is concerned. In one sense, ask for something and then more or less what you receive in return, be content with that. I think one thing that this woman would be sorely deficient in would be the area of gratitude or gratefulness. That's one thing that exactness to a wrong degree would produce. The lack of proper gratitude and proper thanksgiving. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say you ask for toast done properly and you got toast, period. Well, praise God, at least it's toast. At least someone didn't say, well, we don't have anything around to eat. The person who's always after, well, I've got to have it done just right, is going to miss the blessing that, hey, listen, at least someone did it for you. The person who is over-precise or over-exact shows a lack of gratitude in their life. They're going to miss a great blessing. Of course, they're very disagreeable, irascible type individual. Very disagreeable to live with. A non-pleasant person. A very demanding one. And we don't want, in being precise or exact, to miss the blessing that at least we got somewhere in the ballpark of that for which we asked. I mean, at least you have a wife or a husband. Some people don't here in the church. At least you have one. It may be one period and not one properly, but at least it's one. Nevertheless, people can make out of that whatever they want to make out of that. I think I have one properly, if you want to know what I think about my own family. But one period is better than none at all. A child period, even if he has hair that combs like a wire brush, she'll never win any beauty pageants. Well, praise God. I remember hearing one fella that I knew a long time ago, and if you saw his boys, they're now grown. They're the ugliest critters you've ever seen. But oh, did he love them, though. That really was a testimony to me. And he was always talking about their hair. It's like a jackhammer had run over the top of their head or something. But he loved them. He said, I don't care what they look like. He said, they're the most beautiful children in the whole world to me. They grew up and they're still ugly critters as far as I'm concerned. But that man is grateful, though, for his children. Their feet may be too long, or their nose hangs down too far, or their ears go out too far, or whatever. Or their hair's too thick, or too thin, or too light, or too dark, or... You know, there's a person who's too precise and too exact. And we can never have everything just the way we want it. So we might as well stop that game right now. That's a losing game in life. So we might as well learn to quit that game right now. You're never going to get everything you want just the way that you want it. You're going to make yourself and everyone around you wrecked for as long as you live, if that's the way that you continue to live. There would be point A that Lewis would probably want us to realize, is you're never going to have everything just the way you want it. You're never going to get everything, period, let alone the way you want it. So at least when you do get it, then rejoice that you got it. You got bread, you got egg, you ate it with a spoon, but you got it. An egg is an egg is an egg. Still an egg. No tree bark was ever mixed in with that I ever saw. I would have known if it had. It would have given consistency to the egg. At least I got it. It's the same as what was in the white shell before the shell was ever cracked. Think of all the different ways you go to make that. Some people like it so that you crack the egg and open it and stuff just runs everywhere. That's almost the same to me anyway, as eating a raw egg. Although I like it that way, that's fine with me. I'll eat it either way. I guess what they don't like is the white part whenever it runs like that. Let the yolk be runny, that's all right. Well, you see, we're back to the fact that every person's different. I mean, what are the eggs? Are they fried out hard, fried easy, sunny side up? Are they Benedict? Are they hard-boiled? Are they raw? I mean, think of all the ways you can just make an egg. All it is an egg. And all the different ways you can make that. And I dare say that everyone in here has one or two ways that you like it more than one or two other ways. Although you might eat all of them. Some of you might not eat all of them. I would eat all of them. It wouldn't bother me. But there are some that I like more than others. But to get back to what I was saying, exactness or preciseness inordinately, I think, is wrong. It's impossible, and it's wrong. So we might say exactness in moderation. Now that may sound like we're saying exactness as long as you manifest it inexactly. But that's not exactly what I mean. There's a proper exactness. In other words, there are times for and there are places for exactness and preciseness, such as the making of nuclear bombs, brain surgery, commercial airline mechanics, or we could say theological formulation and doctrine. Exactness and preciseness are of the utmost in areas like that. Toast, eggs, I don't think the world will stop. Exactness has its proper realm. Manners, the mundane, well, I think there should be exactness in moderation. There should be proper exactness in areas like that. Of course, if you've got a servant around, I guess you can make them do it any way you want them to do it. Say, get it, slaves, and they'll just go get it. But most of us, we can't afford slaves or servants. A wife and children, all we can handle. We were raised with a servant around our house, so we were a privileged family, a blessed family. I wouldn't call us aristocratic, though. You might want to, but I will. You can if you desire. We won't do that. Now, here's the warning I would like to give about this matter if you take Lewis too far, saying, this business of exactness, this business of delicacy, and I think this is something that you ought to think about. That any doctrine of inexactness, so you say, well, we want to adopt this doctrine of exactness or preciseness, all right? What's the alternative? Well, any doctrine of inexactness is almost always going to lead to slothfulness and laziness. You know what I mean there? I think that there's a balance here that should be maintained. I mean, especially like at work. Some people are more exact than others. But if you adopt the doctrine of, well, we don't have to be precise or exact, watch out where that leads, though. In other words, the person should pretty much try to be as precise as they can be, as exact as they can be. In other words, as ordered, as punctual, as regular, as efficient as they can be. This is a danger that I have seen a lot of people fall into. In other words, to give you another type or another kind of a category of examples, well, it happens in so many different areas. Any time where the newness of something seems to rub off, then so does the exactness or the preciseness about it. All of a sudden we kind of just think of that as kind of just a general, slippery, hard to get a handle on area, and whatever you do or whatever you believe or however you act in that area or in that situation would be acceptable. And then a lot of people just seem to go right down the hill, the slippery hill of inexactness, right on into slothfulness then. maybe being around each other. You tend to take each other for granted. You tend to, I don't know, something is blurred. Some right, proper ingredient to the relationship seems just to be lost. It's lost in the process, in the process of inexactness, which leads to slothfulness, which leads to laziness in a person's life. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, or I guess maybe that was last week, we were talking in the earlier chapter in Screwtape Letters, and I'd given you talking about different types of churches and ministers, and I'd given you an example of the pastor, charismatic one under whom we were raised, a home-type pastor, where we were actually a part of their church. And the process of getting into a series and then kind of thinking, well, it's no big deal that we need to finish this one way or the other. And see, eventually a time or two would be forgivable. And if I use the term forgivable, that means he must have done something wrong. Maybe someone else would want to use a different term than forgivable. But a time or two like that maybe be okay. But what's that going to lead to? Well, what did it lead to? Just a non-exactness and preciseness in everything in their life. They couldn't get anywhere on time. They couldn't keep appointments. They couldn't remember to return things they had borrowed. They couldn't remember to thank you. They couldn't remember to finish their sermon. They'd start the series and would never finish it. And what produces something like that? Well, you're ready to get into a series as long as you know you've got flocks and flocks of people following you and hanging on every word. What about halfway through that series, you're down to 4 or 5 people in the group? And what do you say? What's your rationale? See, there's where inexactness will lead a person. It leads to slothfulness, to sloppy dress, to sloppy, appearance before others. You say, well, it's not really a big difference one way or the other. So what if I don't comb my hair today? Well, that may be okay. If you're the person who's too exact, you need to miss a day or two in combing your hair. That'd be great. But then some people, they like to hear me say that. Praise God, I never have to think anymore the rest of my life then. I mean, that's what we're talking about. You got to think to be able to remember to do all these things. Praise God, I never have to think again. Well, no, that's not what we're talking about. Those are the people who need to comb their hair 4,400 times a day to teach themselves discipline so they'll remember what's going on. In all these years that we've been here, sometimes we've had nights where you don't have a lot of people in here. And so what do you say? Well, you look out there and say, well, I guess we'll just cancel this series then. See, I learned long ago what that produces in people, though. That's a dreadful disease. Once a person catches that, they can't seem to finish a job once they started. They're not dependable. And pretty soon you just lose your relationship with that person completely. Now, I know what I'm talking about. I've seen it happen too many times. I just sat in a church where it happened. Watched the pastor do that. You lose your respect for someone like that. You lose your respect. They're not punctual. You watch. Hope I'm not seriously embarrassing anyone. Just slightly so. That's all right. You watch when people get here. When do they hear? Is it, well, it doesn't really, as long as I get there, praise God, I'm free in the Spirit. I'll tell you another example. I think I told you this long ago. Same church, same group of people. I'd stayed at my grandmother's house on a Saturday night, got up Sunday morning. You know what I had for breakfast that night. I didn't want to get into that story again. It's another story I wanted to tell you here. And some friends of mine, whose parents, at least one of them, happened to go to the charismatic church that we all were part of, that I got to go to like once every 2 months. My parents wouldn't let me leave the Presbyterian church at that early stage of my life. And they could go all the time, any time. But in the process of all of that, had kind of learned this business about, well, we're free in the Spirit. There's no condemnation. I don't know how all these verses apply to them going swimming, which is what I'm leading to here in a moment. But we're free in Christ. We're not bound. If any man puts a yoke of bondage on you, and the early church, they might have celebrated, worship and so forth on Sunday because it was the day of the Lord's resurrection. But all days have been nailed to the cross, Colossians 2. No such thing as a Sabbath anymore. We call it Sunday, but there's no such thing as a Sabbath, let alone a Christian Sabbath. That's a contradiction of terms. Sabbath speaks of law. Christian speaks of liberty and grace. So, no, we're not bound to that. And they called me. I remember they called me on the phone early that morning saying, we are going to go swimming down at this place called Maywood. That was everyone's favorite swimming area around there. Early Sunday morning. I said, what about church? They said, church? So we can always go to church. We'll go tonight if we get back on time. They didn't, by the way. We'll go Wednesday night. Well, they didn't meet on Thursday night. We'll go on Thursday night. Do you want to go with us? Well, my parents wouldn't let me go, but I don't know that I'd want to go anyway, though. I think, go swimming on a Sunday morning? Their attitude was, we can go to church anytime. My attitude would be, we can go swimming anytime. Sunday morning is when church meets up. Maywood's open on Saturday mornings, too. Monday, if you're going to not serve the Lord in His business, why don't you just take a day off work on Monday and go swimming then? Why is it you take a day off from the Lord's day and do something? You treat man higher than God? Well, it didn't make any sense to me. But there I saw people, and of course all those people now are not in the faith any longer. That's what happens, inexactness. See, we want to be exact. I'm a somewhat exact person, but I hope I can be easygoing at the right times and with the appropriate people. But I don't ever want to lose exactness or preciseness, though. Punctuality. Person's doomed if they do. Person who says, well, tell you what, I'll read the Bible or pray when I get around to it. That's right, they'll do it when they get around to it. And the sad story is they never get around to it. These people who say, well, it's no big deal, we're free, we can go to church tonight, the next week. Now, of course, if you've got some excuse that you think that it's worth missing church about, that's between you and God. I won't be ringing your telephone number up. Never called any of you and said, why weren't you here? But it is between you and God. If you want to go on a vacation, go on a vacation. But someone wants to go swimming Sunday morning when the church is meeting, I would have a problem with that. Now let's get real liberal here for anyone that has to hear this. Maybe once a lifetime would be okay. The devil tempted you effectively that morning. But these were people that allowed things like that to come up. Oh, and I remember another thing they always allowed to come up. Relatives are in town now. So you'd rather be with your relatives than with the saints of God? You'd rather be with your earthly father than your heavenly father? It didn't make sense to me. Well, what would they think if you start worrying about what people think, why ever even become a Christian then? You just soon start all over again in the world then if your thought is, well, what will people think? Well, what will they do while I'm gone? Well, they're welcome to come along. Tote them in. Strap them down to a chair. Make them listen. Why is it that whenever Christians get around worldly people seem to control them? You're supposed to be the strong one. What do they do? By their very presence, they force you away from church and force you to stay at home. I'd be ashamed of myself. Think, why, you weak weasel, you ought to be whipped. Let carnal people around me force me to do something that I don't want to do. I should have had enough power to force them to do what they didn't want to do. Amen. Or if not that, we'd go our separate ways. You stay home, watch TV. Well, you don't have one, so they can stay home and feed the birds or watch your hamsters run around on their wheel or whatever. And you can go to church then. So we didn't say when you had to be here at church, did we? I don't think I did. Not yet. I'm going to in just a moment. How many minutes early you have to be here? No, not really. But what does it show about a person? Just don't allow that to start creeping up, and you lose your preciseness then. Because you're going to lose an edge on you as a human being, as a person, that you probably won't recover and that will make you the worse for losing. I can guarantee you that. We don't want the type of rigidity that we find in this woman right here. So hear what I'm saying. We don't want her rigidity. That's an abomination. It's impossible, and you can never live with people like that. Let's hope that we can be easygoing as well as unbending. Now maybe you can't be both of those at the same time, on the same occasion with the same people. But let's hope we can be easygoing as well as unbending appropriately and in the proper occasion at the proper time. Now, did I say enough to cover that? We're not setting any rules, and I only thought of that as an example. I don't have any of those things down in notes. I just speak as I think of illustrations and examples to use. Some of them, most of them, come out of past thoughts and past experiences, though. And I wouldn't want to see happen to anyone here what often happens to people whenever the newness or the freshness of something wears off. Then they're not responsible in that area anymore. At one time they were responsible in that area. And I think that what we have to remember here is that you're not responsible to me. God forbid, I won't be your judge. But we are responsible before the Lord God Himself. So I felt whenever we first started the group that I was a part of back in Minnesota, and I didn't have anyone there but my wife. I felt responsible to be there, to preach. She would lead the singing, and I would teach the message. Don't laugh. It wasn't a laughing matter. It's only amusing when you look back on it. But I felt I wasn't responsible to people. I mean, then you're just performing to please people. We have to recognize there's a greater relationship than just you and myself or you and someone else, but you and God. People don't seem to think of that. They're not cognizant of that fact. It's not impressed heavily enough on their consciousness so that they'll realize I'm responsible before God. And so I should keep up my end of whatever the end is that has been placed in my hand that I'm supposed to hold up and keep off the ground. I've got to hold that up. I've got to be responsible for that. And those are the type of people that God can bless. They seem to have a smooth life and existence. They seem to have a smooth personality. And those are the ones that God can trust, listen to this, with more than what they have now. We could use the very popular example of those ministers who are always wanting more, but who are never satisfied with maybe just rattling around for a few years. And I'm not saying that because I've got any desires to have more. I don't. I don't have any desires to have any desires to have any desires about desires. I just want to keep living and keep serving God and following Jesus. If God hasn't blessed you in place A, running all from A to Z is not going to help you then. You're not really trying to go somewhere where God can bless you. You're not faithful to Him where you are right now, and that's your problem. And guess what? Wherever you go, your problem's going to follow you. We need to remember things like this. It's never going to get better if you aren't better. People always have that false, at the other end of the rainbow notion. It'll get better. It won't ever get better until you get better. So that wherever you go, betterness goes with you then.